What if I told you that the very thing you've been chasing, the thing that keeps slipping through your fingers no matter how fast you run or how tightly you try to hold on, was never meant to be caught in the first place? Not because it doesn't exist, and not because you're unworthy of it, but because what truly belongs to you doesn't require pursuit. It doesn't hide from you. It doesn't test your endurance or measure your desperation. It simply waits quietly for you to stop running long enough to notice that it's already there. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing. Not the physical tiredness of the body, though that's real too, but something deeper, something that lives in the chest and behind the eyes. It's the weariness of constantly reaching for something just beyond your grasp, of molding yourself into shapes you think will finally make you acceptable, lovable, worthy. You change your voice. You adjust your opinions. You laugh at jokes that don't move you and nod along to conversations that drain you. All because somewhere along the way you learned that belonging requires effort, that love is earned through performance, that your natural state is somehow not enough. And maybe you've been doing this for so long that you've forgotten what your natural state even feels like. Maybe the mask you wear has become so familiar that you can no longer distinguish it from your face. Carl Jung wrote extensively about this, about what he called the persona, the social mask we construct to navigate the world, to meet its expectations, to avoid its punishments. The persona is not inherently false. We all need one. It's how we function in a world that requires certain behaviors, certain presentations. But Jung also understood something that many people miss. He understood that the persona becomes a prison when we mistake it for our entirety, when we forget that beneath the performance, beneath the carefully curated version we show to others, there exists a deeper self, a more authentic presence that doesn't need to chase anything because it already knows what it is. You might recognize this feeling, the sense that you're always auditioning for a role in your own life. That every interaction is a test you might fail. That love, friendship, acceptance, all of it is conditional, contingent on your ability to be what others need you to be. And so you chase. You chase approval. You chase validation. You chase relationships that feel more like negotiations than connections. You chase opportunities that promise to finally prove your worth. You chase and chase and chase, and somehow the distance between you and what you want never seems to close. But here's what nobody tells you, or what they tell you, but you can't quite hear until you're ready. The things you're chasing, the real things, the things that actually matter, they're not running from you. They're not playing hard to get. They're not testing your commitment. If something truly belongs in your life, if a person, a path, a sense of purpose is genuinely aligned with who you are beneath the persona, it doesn't require you to become someone else to claim it. It doesn't ask you to shrink or expand beyond your natural dimensions. It doesn't demand that you prove yourself worthy through suffering or self-abandonment. Think about the people in your life who truly see you, not the version you perform, but the quieter, more uncertain, more complex version that exists when you're alone. These people, if you're fortunate enough to have them, didn't require elaborate pursuit. The connection was simply there, effortless in its recognition, easy in its unfolding. You didn't have to convince them of your value. You didn't have to maintain a constant performance to keep their affection. They met you where you were, and something in that meeting felt like relief, like finally being able to breathe fully after holding your breath for too long. This is what belonging actually feels like. Not the frantic energy of trying to earn your place, but the calm recognition of already having one. And if you've spent most of your life chasing, if the idea of effortless belonging seems foreign or even suspicious, that's understandable. Because we live in a world that teaches us the opposite. We live in a world that tells us love is scarce, that we must compete for it, that we must constantly improve ourselves to deserve it. We're taught that relationships are games with winners and losers, that vulnerability is weakness, that needing nothing from others is strength, and that needing too much is pathology. But Jung understood something different. He understood that the journey toward wholeness, what he called individuation, is not about becoming invulnerable or self-sufficient in some isolated way. It's about becoming more fully yourself, more integrated, more aware of the various parts of your psyche, both light and shadow, and learning to hold all of it with compassion. And part of that journey involves recognizing the difference between genuine connection and the performance of connection. It involves learning to discern between what you're chasing because you genuinely want it and what you're chasing because you think you should want it, because someone else wants it, because it would prove something about you. There's a particular kind of person who struggles with this more than most. Maybe you recognize yourself in this description. You're someone who feels things deeply, who thinks in layers, who can't quite participate in surface-level interactions without feeling exhausted afterward. Small talk feels like wading through mud. Parties drain you. Crowds make you feel more alone than solitude ever does. You've probably been told you're too sensitive, too serious, too intense. You've probably been asked why you can't just relax, just have fun, just be normal. And maybe you've tried. Maybe you've spent years trying to flatten yourself into something more palatable, more socially acceptable. Jung would have recognized you immediately. He would have seen in you what he called the introvert, though that word has been so misused and diluted that it barely captures what he meant. For Jung, introversion wasn't about being shy or antisocial. It was about where you direct your primary energy, where you find meaning and renewal. The introvert's energy flows inward, toward the interior world of thoughts, feelings, reflections, and symbols. This doesn't mean you hate people or can't function socially. It means that your deepest life happens in a place others cannot see, and that the outer world, while necessary, is not where you feel most real, most alive, most yourself. If this describes you, then you've probably spent a lot of time feeling like you're doing life wrong. Because the world celebrates the opposite orientation. It celebrates extroversion, the outward flow of energy, the person who gains vitality from external stimulation, from social interaction, from constant engagement with the outer world. And there's nothing wrong with that orientation. But when it's treated as the only valid way to be human, when introversion is pathologized or dismissed, then people like you learn to chase a way of being that doesn't fit. You learn to pursue a version of life that exhausts you, that requires you to constantly override your natural rhythms, your natural needs. You chase friendships that demand more social energy than you have to give. You chase career paths that value constant visibility over depth of work. You chase romantic relationships with people who mistake your need for solitude as rejection, who take your quietness as coldness, who cannot understand that your love is deep precisely because it doesn't perform itself constantly. And in all this chasing, you move further and further from what actually belongs to you, from the life that would meet you where you are rather than demanding you become someone else. The exhaustion you feel is real. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's the natural consequence of living out of alignment with your own nature. Imagine trying to write with your non-dominant hand for years, every single day, every single interaction. You could probably do it. You could probably get reasonably good at it, but it would always require more effort, more concentration, more energy than using your dominant hand. And at the end of each day, you would be tired in a way that goes beyond normal fatigue. That's what it feels like to chase a life that doesn't actually fit you, to pursue connections and achievements and ways of being that require you to constantly override who you are. And here's where it gets more complicated, more painful. Because when you live this way for long enough, when you chase and perform and adjust yourself for years, you start to attract things that match the performance rather than the reality. You attract friends who like the version you're pretending to be. You attract opportunities that suit the persona you've constructed. You attract romantic partners who fall in love with your mask. And then you're trapped in a strange kind of loneliness, surrounded by people and achievements that don't actually touch the real you, that don't nourish the deeper parts of yourself that you've learned to hide. This is one of the cruelest paradoxes of chasing. You can succeed at it. You can actually catch what you're chasing. And then you discover that what you've caught doesn't satisfy the hunger you thought it would. Because the hunger wasn't for those specific things. The hunger was for recognition, for being seen and valued as you actually are, not as you've learned to present yourself. The hunger was for a sense of belonging that doesn't require constant performance, and no amount of external achievement, no number of friends who only know your persona, no romantic relationship built on a false presentation of self can satisfy that particular hunger. Jung called this the crisis of the persona. It's what happens when the mask becomes so successful that you lose touch with what's beneath it. And often, this crisis arrives in midlife, though it can come earlier or later depending on the person. It arrives as a deep sense of emptiness, a feeling that despite doing everything right, despite achieving what you were supposed to achieve, despite being who you were supposed to be, something essential is missing. You look at your life from the outside, and it might look fine, even enviable. But from the inside, it feels hollow, like you're living someone else's story, like you've been chasing goals that were never actually yours. If you're in this place, or if you've been in this place, you know how disorienting it is. Because the obvious solution, to stop chasing, to let go of the performance, to start living from a more authentic place, that solution is terrifying. It means risking everything you've built. It means potentially losing the friends who only know your persona. It means stepping away from achievements that no longer mean anything to you, but that everyone else admires. It means disappointing people. It means being misunderstood. It means facing the possibility that when you stop performing, when you stop chasing, you might discover that you don't know who you are underneath it all. But here's what Jung understood, what he spent his life exploring both in his own psyche and in his work with others. Underneath the persona, underneath the performance, underneath all the chasing and striving and self-abandonment, there is something real. He called it the self, with a capital S, to distinguish it from the small self, the ego, the conscious personality. The self is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, all the parts you've accepted and all the parts you've rejected. And the process of individuation, the process of becoming whole, involves gradually bringing more of the self into consciousness, learning to live from that deeper place rather than from the narrow confines of the persona. This process is not comfortable. It's not a simple matter of deciding to be authentic and then everything falls into place. It requires you to face parts of yourself you've been avoiding. It requires you to grieve the life you thought you were supposed to have. It requires you to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate not knowing, to release your grip on outcomes. It requires you to stop chasing and start listening, to turn your attention inward and ask yourself what you actually want, what actually matters to you, not what you've been taught to want or what would make you look good or what would finally prove your worth. And in that listening, in that turning inward, something shifts. You begin to notice that the things you were chasing, the real things, the things that actually align with your deeper nature, they're not distant at all. They've been there all along, waiting for you to stop running in the wrong direction. The right work, the work that uses your particular gifts and speaks to your particular interests, it doesn't require you to become someone else. The right people, the people who can actually meet you in your depth and complexity, they don't need you to perform. The right path, the path that leads toward your own wholeness rather than someone else's definition of success, it doesn't hide from you. It reveals itself when you're quiet enough to see it. This is what it means when we say that what truly belongs to you never needs to be chased. It's not a magical promise that everything will fall into your lap without effort. It's a recognition that there's a fundamental difference between aligned effort and desperate pursuit. Aligned effort comes from a place of inner clarity. You're moving towards something because it genuinely resonates with who you are, because it calls to something deep in you, because the work itself is meaningful regardless of the outcome. This kind of effort is sustainable. It doesn't deplete you in that soul-deep way. It might be challenging, it might require discipline and persistence, but it doesn't require you to betray yourself. Desperate pursuit, on the other hand, comes from a place of lack, of feeling that you're not enough as you are, that you must acquire something external to become whole or worthy or lovable. This kind of pursuit is exhausting because it's built on a false premise. No external achievement, no relationship, no amount of approval from others can actually fill the void of self-abandonment. If you don't know yourself, if you don't accept yourself, if you're constantly running from your own depths, then nothing you chase will ever satisfy you because you're trying to solve an internal problem with external solutions. And society doesn't help with this. We live in a culture that profits from your sense of inadequacy, that constantly tells you you're not enough, that you need this product or that achievement or this relationship status to finally be complete. We live in a culture that celebrates busyness and productivity and constant striving, that treats rest as laziness and reflection as self-indulgence. We live in a culture that pathologizes solitude, that assumes if you're alone, you must be lonely, that if you're quiet, you must have nothing to say, that if you need time away from people, you must be damaged or antisocial. For someone with a rich inner life, for someone whose natural orientation is inward, this cultural context is crazy-making. You're constantly receiving messages that your way of being is wrong, that you need to fix yourself, that you need to become more outgoing, more social, more comfortable with constant stimulation. And if you internalize these messages, if you believe them, then you start chasing a way of being that will never feel natural to you. You start pursuing a life that looks right from the outside but feels wrong from the inside. Jung was deeply critical of this kind of collective pressure, this demand for conformity. He understood that true psychological health is not about adjusting yourself to society's expectations. It's about becoming more fully yourself, even when that self doesn't fit neatly into prescribed categories. He understood that the person who can stand apart from the collective, who can think their own thoughts and feel their own feelings and follow their own path, that person is not antisocial or defective. That person is individuating, becoming whole, learning to live from their own center rather than from the expectations and projections of others. But this kind of independence, this kind of authenticity, it often makes other people uncomfortable. Because when you stop performing, when you stop chasing approval, when you start living from a place of inner alignment, you hold up a mirror to everyone around you who's still performing, still chasing, still abandoning themselves for acceptance. Your presence becomes a quiet challenge to the collective agreement that we must all pretend, all perform, all chase the same narrow definitions of success and happiness. And so people project onto you. They call you cold when you're simply self-contained. They call you arrogant when you're simply not seeking their approval. They call you antisocial when you're simply selective about where you invest your limited social energy. They call you too sensitive when you're simply aware of nuances they've learned to ignore. They call you too serious when you're simply not interested in superficial distraction. These projections say more about the person making them than they say about you. But they can still hurt. They can still make you doubt yourself. They can still tempt you back into chasing, back into performing, back into abandoning your own depths for the comfort of fitting in. This is where you have to develop what Jung might call a strong ego, though again, that phrase has been misunderstood. A strong ego, in Jungian terms, is not about arrogance or dominance. It's about having a stable enough sense of yourself that you can withstand the projections and expectations of others without losing your center. It's about being able to hear criticism without immediately believing it, being able to face rejection without crumbling, being able to stand alone when necessary without feeling that your aloneness means you're unlovable. Developing this strength, is part of the individuation process. It happens gradually, through repeatedly choosing your own truth over external approval, through learning to trust your own perceptions, even when they differ from the collective view, through discovering that you can survive disappointment and misunderstanding and still remain intact. Each time you choose authenticity over performance, each time you honor your own needs rather than overriding them for others, each time you stop chasing something that doesn't truly belong to you, you strengthen this inner stability. You build a relationship with yourself that becomes more important, more nourishing than any external validation. And paradoxically, this is when you become truly available for genuine connection. Because when you're not desperate for approval, when you're not chasing validation, when you're not performing for acceptance, you can meet others from a place of fullness rather than lack. You can offer your authentic presence rather than a carefully curated version designed to please. You can recognize when someone actually sees you, actually meets you in your depth, because you're no longer so hungry for approval that you'll mistake crumbs for a feast. The relationships that form from this place, they're different. They're not based on need or performance or transaction. They're based on recognition, on genuine resonance, on two people meeting each other without masks. These relationships don't require constant maintenance or anxiety or second-guessing. They have a quality of ease, of naturalness, of coming home. You don't have to chase these people. You don't have to convince them of your worth. They simply see you, and in that seeing, there's a kind of peace, a kind of relief that tells you this is what connection is supposed to feel like. But to find these relationships, you often have to let go of the ones that require you to perform. You have to release friendships that drain you, that demand you be someone you're not, that punish you for your depth or your need for solitude or your inability to maintain a constant cheerful facade. You have to walk away from romantic relationships where your love for your persona rather than your reality. You have to stop investing in connections that leave you feeling more alone than actual solitude does. This letting go, it's painful, even when you know intellectually that these relationships aren't serving you. Even when you can see clearly that they require too much self-abandonment, the actual process of releasing them brings grief. Because humans are wired for connection. We're social creatures, even those of us who are introverted, even those of us who need significant time alone. And letting go of connection, even connection that isn't truly nourishing, it triggers our deepest fears. The fear of being alone, the fear of being unlovable, the fear that if we stop performing, if we stop chasing, we'll discover that nobody wants the real us. Jung would tell you that this fear is worth facing, that on the other side of it, there's something more valuable than the shallow connections you're releasing. There's the possibility of genuine intimacy, of being known and loved as you actually are. There's the possibility of solitude that's nourishing rather than lonely, of time alone that restores you rather than depleting you. There's the possibility of building a life that actually fits you, that reflects your values and your rhythms and your particular way of being in the world. But you have to be willing to sit in the uncertainty first. You have to be willing to not know how it will all work out. You have to be willing to trust that what truly belongs to you will find you when you stop running in the wrong direction. And this trust, it's not blind faith. It's not naive optimism. It's something more grounded, more embodied. It's the trust that comes from gradually learning that you can survive disappointment, that you can tolerate solitude, that you're more resilient than you thought, that your worth is not contingent on external validation. This trust builds slowly, through experience, through repeatedly making choices that honor your deeper self and discovering that you don't fall apart. Through choosing to leave the party early because you're drained and discovering that the world doesn't end. Through saying no to social obligations that don't genuinely interest you and discovering that people either understand or they weren't your people anyway. Through sharing your actual thoughts and feelings with someone and discovering that they can handle your depth or discovering that they can't and that you survive that disappointment. through pursuing work that genuinely matters to you, even when it doesn't look impressive to others, and discovering that the internal satisfaction is worth more than external applause. Each of these experiences teaches you something that cannot be learned intellectually. It teaches you in your body, in your nervous system, in the deep places where your survival fears live, that you're okay, that you can trust yourself, that you don't need to chase or perform or abandon yourself to be worthy of existence, of love, of a place in the world. And as this trust deepens, as it moves from an idea to a lived reality, something in you relaxes. The desperate quality of your pursuit fades. You stop grasping. You stop forcing. You stop trying to make things happen through sheer will and anxiety. And in that relaxation, in that release of grasping, you become available to notice what's actually there. You become available to see the opportunities that align with who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. You become available to recognize the people who can actually meet you rather than the people who need you to perform. You become available to hear your own inner voice, the quiet knowing that's been trying to guide you all along, but that you couldn't hear over the noise of chasing and striving and performing. This inner voice, Jung might call it the voice of the self, the deeper wisdom that exists beneath the ego's anxious planning and controlling. It doesn't speak in shoulds or have tos. It doesn't compare you to others or measure you against external standards. It simply knows what's true for you, what's aligned with your nature, what will lead you toward wholeness rather than fragmentation. But you can only hear this voice when you're quiet enough, when you're still enough, when you've stopped running long enough to listen. And listening requires solitude, not necessarily physical solitude, though that helps, but internal solitude, a kind of inner stillness, a willingness to be with yourself without distraction or numbing or constant activity. For many people, this is terrifying, because in this stillness, everything you've been running from catches up with you. The feelings you've been avoiding, the questions you've been postponing, the grief you've been outrunning, the disappointment, the loneliness, the fear, all of it rises up when you stop moving, when you stop chasing, when you finally sit still. But Jung understood that this rising up, this confrontation with what you've been avoiding, this is not punishment. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's actually the beginning of healing, the beginning of integration, the beginning of becoming whole. Because you cannot integrate what you won't acknowledge. You cannot heal what you won't feel. You cannot become whole while parts of yourself remain exiled in shadow, denied and rejected and pushed away because they don't fit the image you're trying to maintain. The shadow, in Jungian terms, contains everything about yourself that you've deemed unacceptable, everything you've learned to hide or deny or project onto others. For someone who's been chasing approval, who's been performing for acceptance, the shadow often contains your actual needs, your actual feelings, your actual desires. It contains your anger at being unseen, your grief at abandoning yourself, your longing for genuine connection, your exhaustion from constant performance, your resentment at always accommodating others, your sadness at living a life that doesn't reflect your truth. All of this lives in shadow until you're willing to turn toward it, to acknowledge it, to bring it into consciousness with compassion rather than judgment. And this turning toward, this willingness to see and accept all of yourself, this is some of the deepest work of individuation. It's not comfortable. It's not quick. It doesn't happen in a single moment of insight. It's a gradual process of befriending the parts of yourself you've rejected, of learning to hold your complexity without needing to flatten or simplify yourself into something more palatable. And as you do this work, as you integrate more of your shadow, as you become more whole, something interesting happens. You become less interested in chasing, not because you've given up on life or become passive or resigned, but because you're no longer driven by that desperate need to prove your worth through external achievement. You're no longer trying to fill an internal void with external validation. You're no longer running from yourself. And from this more grounded, more integrated place, you can discern more clearly what actually matters to you, what actually belongs in your life, what's actually worth your energy and attention. You start to notice the difference between what you genuinely want and what you think you should want. You start to notice the difference between relationships that nourish you and relationships that drain you. You start to notice the difference between work that uses your gifts and work that simply pays the bills. You start to notice the difference between activities that restore you and activities that deplete you. And with this noticing comes choice. You can start to orient your life around what actually fits you rather than what looks good or what others expect or what you think will finally make you acceptable. This reorientation, it's not selfish. It's not narcissistic. It's not about ignoring the needs of others or refusing all compromise or demanding that the world accommodate you. It's about recognizing that you cannot genuinely give to others what you don't have yourself. You cannot offer authentic connection while abandoning yourself. You cannot create meaningful work while betraying your own values. You cannot love others well while rejecting your own complexity. The more whole you become, the more integrated, the more you're living from your actual center rather than from a performed persona, the more you have to offer the world, the more genuine your presence becomes. But this offering, this presence, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't chase validation. It simply is. And the people who can recognize it, who can meet you in that depth, they find you. Not because you're performing or pursuing or proving anything, but because there's a resonance, a recognition, a sense that here is someone who's real, who's not hiding behind a mask, who's willing to be seen in their full complexity. These are your people. These are the connections that truly belong to you. And they don't require chasing because they're based on recognition rather than performance. The same is true for your work, for your path, for your sense of purpose. When you stop chasing what you think you should do, when you stop pursuing achievements that don't actually matter to you, when you become quiet enough to hear what's true for you, your path reveals itself. Not necessarily all at once, not necessarily in a blinding flash of clarity, but gradually, through small knowings, through gentle pulls towards certain activities or interests or ways of being in the world. And when you follow these pulls, when you honor these knowings, you discover that the work doesn't feel like chasing. It feels like unfolding, like becoming, like stepping into something that was always waiting for you. This doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean there are no obstacles or challenges or moments of doubt. But the quality of the difficulty is different. It's not the soul-crushing difficulty of forcing yourself to be someone you're not. It's the stretching difficulty of growing into who you actually are. It's not the exhaustion of constant performance. It's the satisfying tiredness of meaningful effort. It's not the anxiety of wondering if you're good enough. It's the groundedness of knowing you're doing what's yours to do, regardless of external recognition or reward. And here's what nobody tells you, or what they tell you, but you can't quite believe until you experience it. Living this way, living from your actual center rather than from a performed persona, living in alignment with your nature rather than in constant opposition to it, this way of living is not lonely. It might involve more solitude. It might involve fewer surface-level connections. It might involve saying no more often and disappointing people who want you to remain as you were. But it's not lonely, because you're no longer abandoned by yourself. You're no longer living in that strange exile where you're surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone because nobody actually knows you. When you stop chasing, when you stop performing, when you start living from your truth, you come home to yourself. And that homecoming, that sense of finally being in right relationship with your own existence, it's a kind of belonging that no external validation can provide. It's a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances or other people's approval. It's a kind of strength that comes from integration rather than performance, from wholeness rather than fragmentation. Jung spent his life exploring this territory, this journey toward wholeness. And what he discovered, both in his own psyche and in his work with countless others, is that the journey is never finished. Individuation is not a destination you reach and then you're done. It's a lifelong process of becoming more conscious, more integrated, more whole. There are always new layers to explore, new parts of the shadow to integrate, new ways in which you've been abandoning yourself that you hadn't noticed before. But the quality of the journey changes as you go deeper. The desperate chasing fades. The anxious performing relaxes. The constant striving softens into something more like unfolding. And in that unfolding, you discover that what truly belongs to you has been there all along. The right work, the work that uses your particular gifts and speaks to your particular concerns, it doesn't require you to become someone else. It requires you to become more fully yourself. The right people, the people who can meet you in your depth and complexity, they don't need you to perform. They need you to be real. The right path, the path that leads toward your own wholeness rather than someone else's definition of success, it doesn't hide from you. It reveals itself when you're willing to see it, when you're willing to trust it, when you're willing to follow it, even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. This is the quiet revolution of stopping the chase. This is the radical act of trusting that you're enough as you are, that your depths are not defects, that your need for solitude is not pathology, that your way of being in the world, however different it might be from the collective norm, is valid and valuable and worthy of honor. This is the slow, patient work of coming home to yourself, of learning to live from your center, of allowing what truly belongs to you to find you, because you've finally stopped running in the wrong direction. And if you're reading this, if these words resonate with something deep in you, if you recognize yourself in this description, then maybe you're ready to stop chasing. Maybe you're ready to release the performance, to let go of the desperate pursuit, to trust that what's truly yours doesn't need to be caught, because it's already here, waiting for you to be still enough to notice it. Maybe you're ready to come home to yourself, to honor your depths, to live from your truth rather than from others' expectations. Maybe you're ready to discover that you are never broken, never defective, never too much or not enough. Maybe you're ready to discover that you're simply yourself, complex and deep and real, and that this is not only acceptable but necessary, not only valid but valuable. The path is not easy. It requires courage to stop performing. It requires strength to face what you've been avoiding. It requires patience to trust the unfolding. But on the other side of the chasing, on the other side of the performance, on the other side of the desperate pursuit, there's something worth finding. There's you, whole and integrated and real. There's a life that actually fits you. There's a sense of peace that doesn't depend on external validation. There's a kind of belonging that comes from being in right relationship with your own existence. And all of this, it was never something you needed to chase. It was always something that belonged to you, waiting quietly for you to stop running long enough to claim it.